These divisions of the gatekeepers were named for their family leaders, and like the other Levites, they served at the house of the Lord. They were assigned by families for guard duty at the various gates, without regard to age or training, for it was all decided by means of sacred lots. I think part of the reason it keeps mentioning this, like, without regard to age or training or any of that, initially, the first time it said that, it was because all the people who could have been delegated different responsibilities were equally qualified. And so, due to that, they decided to cast sacred lots for the placement, so there's no, favoritism being shown. But yeah, the no regard for training seems to be odd, but they might not necessarily have been trained the same way, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the quality of their training was any better or worse. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Alright, so we're looking at 1 Chronicles chapter 26. So the past few chapters have been kind of breaking down different divisions of duties related to the temple, and I think after this chapter it gets into something that's not so directly temple related, but still, with the transition from the tabernacle and that structure and that way of having, the offerings and the worship for God and all sorts of things like that, transitioning from that to the temple, which is a more permanent, solid structure, there came with it some reassignment of duties, and we're kind of in the middle of that. Now this has, in a way, this period of the history of Israel has already been covered in previous books and chapters, but Chronicles is sort of meant as a reminder / explanation to the Israelite exiles, because they got taken over by other kingdoms. So they're exiled, and this is kind of telling them, alright, here's how we got into this mess, and I'm gonna not so subtly hint at what was supposed to happen, how it went wrong, and then we can figure out how to get back to what we should have had and, fix all this. All according to a man named Ezra, which the book named after him comes up later, so then we can get a little more insight into why he would be doing all of this. Anyway, okay. If I need to explain any more context, I will as we come across it, but for now, let's hop into 1 Chronicles chapter 26. These are the divisions of the gatekeepers. From the Korahites, there was Meshelemiah, son of Kori, of the family of Abiasaph. Sons of Meshelemiah were Zechariah the oldest, Jediael the second, Zebediah the third, Jathniel the fourth, Elam the fifth, Jehohanan the sixth, and Eliahonai the seventh. Sons of Obed-Edom, also gatekeepers, were Shemaiah the oldest, Jehozabad the second, Joah the third, Sakar the fourth, Nethanel the fifth, Amiel the sixth, Issachar the seventh, and Pulithai the eighth. God had richly blessed Obed-Edom. Tell you what, I'll pause there for a sec. Alright. So, previous chapters, more specific, the most recent 3 chapters, had a breakdown of the Levites' duties, and then the priests, and then the musicians, which were all directly related to the temple. The gatekeepers, I think some of them also guarded the temple in a way, but this was also, I think, expanding more broadly to the city of Jerusalem and its gates. So, basically, we've got, like, you know, it's kind of saying that there were different subdivisions of the duties for the gatekeepers and maybe the different shifts or watches that they had based on, you know, a certain ancestor and their sons. Because a lot of things tended to get broken down into, like, the different families and clans and, you know, divisions like that. So, really, a lot of the duties were, like, almost family trades in a way. So we've got, it seems like maybe just 2 primary clans, I guess they were, or definitely families, that so far it has mentioned being gatekeepers. Note there at Abiasaph, that's coming from the Greek version. Hebrew reads Asaph. But, like, honestly, the name in particular, I don't know if that's really a big deal for the modern day reader. The Israelite exiles, who this was originally intended for, might have had a better idea of these people and their names and any of the significance of said names. But for now, I think I will just continue on to verse 6. Obed-Edom's son Shemaiah had sons with great ability who earned positions of great authority in the clan. Their names were Othni, Raphael, Obed, and Elzabad. Their relatives, Elihu and Semachiah, were also very capable men. All of these descendants of Obed-Edom, including their sons and grandsons, 62 of them in all, were very capable men, well qualified for their work. Meshelemiah's 18 sons and relatives were also very capable men. Hosa of the Merari clan appointed Shimri as the leader among his sons, though he was not the oldest. His other sons included Hilkiah the second, Tebaliah the third, and Zechariah the fourth. Hosa's sons and relatives, who served as gatekeepers, numbered 13 in all. Okay, now I'm not saying this is going to happen for sure in this chapter, but the previous couple, I personally have been just trying, I don't know, I've read through the chapters and been like, okay, we've got an explanation of how the duties were divided up, but not which duties went to whom. Like, I feel like that would be, you know, some decently important information to have, but at least I think for the original audience, it might have been more significant. To us, maybe less so. So, I'm going to try not to dwell too much on it. It's just like, okay, why are we explaining how things got divided up if we're not explaining the different duties that got divided up and who they went to? Like, how do you tie the significance of any of that to anybody of later generations? I don't know. But let's maybe continue reading on in this chapter and see. Actually, before I do though, there might be explanations elsewhere in the Bible of the different duties, and it's just maybe kind of assumed that the mentioning of the divisions in these chapters follows the order in which those duties are mentioned elsewhere. I can't say I recall for sure. But I'm not making any assumptions on that. And so, without making any assumptions, I'm left here kind of scratching my head like, okay, but who's doing what? But, anyway. There were no notes in that section. So, let's continue in verse 12. These divisions of the gatekeepers were named for their family leaders, and like the other Levites, they served at the house of the Lord. They were assigned by families for guard duty at the various gates, without regard to age or training, for it was all decided by means of sacred lots. Which, that was also the case for definitely the priests and the musicians. I forget if the Levites' duties were decided by sacred lots or not. But in any case, I think part of the reason it keeps mentioning this, like, without regard to age or training or any of that, initially, the first time it said that, it was because all the people who could have been delegated different responsibilities were equally qualified. And so, due to that, they decided to cast sacred lots for the placement, so there's no, favoritism being shown or anything like that. And I imagine it's a similar case here. Because so far, all we've read about these, gatekeepers was that they were all well qualified for their work. Things like that. Yeah, without regard to age or training, I think there might still have been, qualifiers on how old one had to be in order to fulfill a particular duty. And a lot of these were kind of passed down through the families anyway, especially like we read last chapter with the musicians. But yeah, the no regard for training seems to be odd, but again, I think it's still leaning into the idea that, well, they're all well qualified, so let's not show any preference toward being trained by this person or that person, or coming from a particular family, or even just, we're not necessarily going to assign the oldest this particular duty because we're equally qualified here, or we're looking at people who are equally qualified here. So I don't think it's we're just gonna not give a care about who does what, as if the duties aren't significant. It would not need to say that if all were the same training. Yeah, they might not necessarily have been trained the same way, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the quality of their training was any better or worse across the different qualified men for these duties, I guess is what I was trying to say. Okay. On to verse 14 for now. The responsibility for the east gate went to Meshelemiah and his group. The north gate was assigned to his son Zechariah, a man of unusual wisdom. The south gate went to Obed-Edom, and his sons were put in charge of the storehouse. Shuppim and Hosah were assigned to the west gate and the gateway leading up to the temple. Guard duties were divided evenly. 6 Levites were assigned each day to the east gate, 4 to the north gate, 4 to the south gate, and 2 pairs at the storehouse. 6 were assigned each day to the west gate, 4 to the gateway leading up to the temple, and 2 to the courtyard. These were the divisions of the gatekeepers from the clans of Korah and Merari. Okay. So, this at least says what the different divisions of the duties were. It just, and actually it even says who got what. So, hey, we don't have the thing that I mentioned in the previous couple of chapters, where it's like, okay, here's how things were divided, but we're not going to tell you who did what. I assume the number of people at each gate probably related to the number of people that would pass through said gate and or the overall importance of said gate. Because obviously, if more important stuff is coming through and or more people are coming through, you want more guards there. I mean, yeah, technically that's an assumption, but in lieu of any other information, I think that's probably the most reasonable assumption. 'Cause, I mean, really, it mentions 6 assigned to the East Gate, and then essentially 4 everywhere else. Because 2 pairs is also 4. It does also mention 6 at the West Gate, though. So you got 6 to the East and West. And then 4 everywhere else except an additional 2 in the courtyard. But the courtyard would have been, like, within the temple, I think. Or certainly in the temple grounds. So, that's all. There's already at least a layer or 2 of gatekeeping before getting to that point. So, that might also have had something to do with having fewer guards assigned to the courtyard. Anyway. Hey, yes, I am technically making assumptions, but I feel like they're fairly logical and reasonable. Okay, so, note there at Mishelamiah, Hebrew just says Shelamiah without the M-E at the start. But that's considered a variant spelling, with Mishelamiah being mentioned earlier. That seems to be a reasonable connection to make in translating efforts. Note there at the temple. Okay, so it's talking about the gate leading up to the temple, which could be read as, based on what they're translating from, could be read as the gate of Shalaketh on the upper road. Meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. So, I imagine, given that the meaning of Shalaketh is uncertain, the translators focused more on the direction of the gate and where it was located. Note there, courtyard could also be read as the colonnade, meaning is uncertain, but courtyard, colonnade, fairly similar terms, honestly. Okay. So we've got these different divisions of the gatekeepers. And now we'll move on to verse 20, where it seems like it's going to talk about some other officials. Treasurers specifically, and others. Okay. Other Levites, led by Ahijah, were in charge of the treasuries of the house of God and the treasuries of the gifts dedicated to the Lord. From the family of Libni in the clan of Gershon, Jehiel was the leader. The sons of Jehiel, Zetham and his brother Joel, were in charge of the treasuries of the house of the Lord. Sorry, looking further through the chapter to see divisions of things and where I might want to pause. Okay, so this paragraph is talking about treasurers. The family of Libni. They're... Okay. Sons of Jehiel were in charge of the treasuries of the house of the Lord. Which... Okay, so it mentions the house of God and the gifts dedicated to the Lord. So were those... I guess those might have been stored in slightly different places, but also the wording is very similar. Might have been, like, some of it went to the priests specifically and others to the Levites, or... I mean, there were mentions, I mean, really throughout the Old Testament, about things being dedicated to the Lord. And not all of them were apparently, like, things that would be temple duty related. So, I don't know. In any case, we've got basically Jehiel was in charge of this stuff, and or maybe it was his sons that were in charge of it, and it's just talking about him because he was their father and was the leader of that clan. Anyway, Hebrew there says Laden, variant spelling, but it's the same person. Compare to chapter 6, verse 17. Okay, so go back to that breakdown. There were, I think chapter 6 was part of the, like, genealogical stuff. So then you might be able to line that up with where on the family tree this is coming in. Hebrew there says Jehieli. Variant spelling, one letter off. Can be compared to chapter 23, verse 8. Okay, anywho. Feel like I've been talking a little more than normal. Moving on to chapter 23. These are the leaders that descended from Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziel. From the clan of Amram, Shebuel was a descendant of Gershom, son of Moses. He was the chief officer of the treasuries. His relatives through Eleazar were Rehabiah, Jeshaiah, Joram, Zikri, and Shelomoth. Shelomoth and his relatives were in charge of the treasuries containing the gifts that King David, family leaders, and the generals and captains and other officers of the army had dedicated to the Lord. These men dedicated some of the plunder they had gained in battle to maintain the house of the Lord. Shelomoth and his relatives also cared for the gifts dedicated to the Lord by Samuel the seer, Saul son of Kish, Abner son of Ner, and Joab son of Zeruiah. All the other dedicated gifts were in their care too. Alright, so it's going through, I guess, the breakdown of some of the treasuries here, in a way. Shelomoth, and probably also his family / clan, were seemingly directly in charge of gifts that were dedicated by, like, leaders or, like, kings and commanders, essentially. Or it says generals and captains here, but primarily stuff that was, you know, gained from battles, loot that was taken / plunder, whatever you want to call that, and things from that were dedicated to the Lord. Now, note there at generals and captains. Hebrew says commanders of thousands and of hundreds, which is kind of a similar way of saying generals and captains, you know. Just different way of explaining the ranks within the army. Hebrew says Shelomith there in verse 28, which could be a variant spelling, especially with the ancient Hebrew not really having vowels like we do. Us, you know, modern English readers, at least. So, yeah. Those kind of gifts were overseen by Shelomoth and his descendants, I would imagine. Okay, verse 29. From the clan of Izhar came Kenaniah. He and his sons were given administrative responsibilities over Israel as officials and judges. From the clan of Hebron came Hashabiah. He and his relatives, 1,700 capable men, were put in charge of the Israelite lands west of the Jordan River. They were responsible for all matters related to the things of the Lord and the service of the king in that area. Now, the lands west of the Jordan River would have been, flashback to when they were first entering the Promised Land after leaving Egypt. There were I think maybe 2.5 tribes that actually decided they wanted land in a certain area before they even crossed the Jordan River into the bulk of the Promised Land. And Moses was like, okay, yeah, sure, you can, or was it Joshua? I don't know. One of them was like, all right, you can have this land here, but you got to go help fight with your fellow men to, you know, help us gain control of this chunk of the Promised Land across the Jordan River here. I think those tribes had wanted it for raising sheep or some particular purpose like that was why they wanted it. So they agreed to that deal, helped with all that the way that they wanted, and yeah. So that's why some of the tribes were on the other side of the river. Kenaniah and his sons were administrators. It says officials and judges here. Maybe not judges like the Book of Judges kind of judges, but more like we would think of judges, like, you know, legal judges. Now, Hashabiah and his relatives were the ones in charge of what was west of the Jordan River. Of course, I go this way. I should probably point. No, that's correct for viewing purposes. Or was it the Eastern group that was split off? I don't know. Yeah, west of the Jordan River then would have been closer to the Mediterranean Sea. So yeah, I guess that was actually like really the bulk of the Promised Land. Anyway, alright, lest I continue trying to figure that out, let me move on to verse 31. Also from the clan of Hebron came Jeriah, who was the leader of the Hebronites, according to the genealogical records. In the 40th year of David's reign, a search was made in the records, and capable men from the clan of Hebron were found at Jazer in the land of Gilead. There were 2,700 capable men among the relatives of Jeriah. King David sent them to the east side of the Jordan River and put them in charge of the tribes of Reuben and Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh. They were responsible for all matters related to God and to the king. Okay, so, yeah, it was east of the Jordan River that had those tribes. So, Jeriah and his descendants, or at least his family at that time, were responsible for the tribes that were kind of separated a bit geographically by the Jordan River from the rest of the Kingdom of Israel. And so they were, I'd almost associate them with being like governors in a way, but it also said they were responsible for all matters related to God and to the king. So they were, in terms of relation to the king, they might have been governors in a way. But as far as matters related to God, they were, I mean, they obviously weren't the same as priests, but, you know, they may have also had some sway over, you know, making declarations for that area in terms of how the people should follow God's commands and when and how to do various things for festivals and whatnot. But let me not speculate too much on how that all, on what that all meant. Alright. But we do actually get some explanation of who did what in this chapter, so I appreciate that. But yeah, so that covers the treasurers, the gatekeepers, and some other officials that were in charge of at least various parts of the kingdom. But that's what we get for 1 Chronicles chapter 26. Alright, so I'm realizing we started off all this duty assignment stuff with the Levites in general, because technically all the stuff, at least up to this point since then, have been subgroups of the Levites. Like, the priests are all Levites, just a specific group of Levites descended from Aaron. The musicians were Levites. The people, like the gatekeepers and people mentioned in this chapter, also Levites. But, yeah, just more of the same kind of theme in general, honestly. At least this time around we got some description of the duties that were assigned, unlike the past couple of chapters. I don't know why that was the way that it was, but, you know, if it was important enough, I'm sure it would have been mentioned. In any case, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell to get updates when I post new videos, then you won't miss future chapters of Bible study as they're released. Make sure you look down on the description as well for links to social media pages, all sorts of other ways to keep up with what I'm doing and interact with stuff like that. There's a Discord server link down there, so we can talk about stuff in a different spot, if that's more your thing. Like, I realize some people might not be into trying to do extended conversations through, like, YouTube comment sections, but, you might want some extended conversation somewhere or another, and that's a good place for it, is in the Discord server. Also got all sorts of other links down in there. Go check them out if you like my stuff and want to keep up with it and interact in other ways. Speaking of the comment section, though, feel free to leave your thoughts and questions down in there if that's what you'd prefer. So, as always, I hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video, whatever the case is. Till next time, stay cool, people.